From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew. President Biden pledges to use federal funding to rebuild the Key Bridge in Baltimore, which collapsed this morning after being struck by a cargo ship. 6 people are still unaccounted for. Former Transportation Secretary LaHood will join us with more. The Supreme Court hearing arguments today in a case that could restrict access to the abortion pill Mifepristone, the first abortion-related case before the High Court since Roe was overturned. We'll talk this hour with legal scholar Carol Sangner of Columbia Law. And our new Bloomberg News Morning Consult poll brings good news for Joe Biden, showing the president gaining ground on Donald Trump in 6 of 7 swing states. We'll have much more coming up over the course of this hour on these new numbers. Thanks for being with us on this Tuesday, live from Washington, with breaking news this morning from Baltimore that has captivated the Capitol. We heard earlier from Maryland Governor Wes Moore speaking with reporters following this bridge collapse that happened around 1:30 a.m. when a cargo ship ran out of power and struck one of the pylons under the bridge. Here's the governor.
This is still very much an active search and rescue mission, and there is not a single resource that we will hold off on deploying. I have already authorized the deployment of everything from air, land, and sea resources to make sure that this search and rescue operation is carried out to its fullest intent.
With 6 souls still unaccounted for, we want to go straight to my partner, Kaylee Lines, who is in the field today at the scene of that bridge collapse in Baltimore. Kaylee, what can you tell us?
Well, Joe, you're absolutely right. There are still 6 individuals unaccounted for, and that is the priority of all of the authorities that are involved in this situation at this point. We heard it from Governor Wes Moore, Senate leaders that were here, Senate representatives and congressional representatives from Maryland, as well as Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, all reiterating right now search and rescue is the priority, the humans and families involved in this. Of course, very quickly thereafter, though, this will turn to a story of recovery. It's unclear what exactly the timeline will be to get this vital way back up and running here. Of course, there are 35,000 individuals that were going over this bridge daily in terms of commuter traffic, also freight and logistics that happens by road. But this is also one of the busiest ports in the United States of America, handles cargo, including autos, the most port handling of autos as any port in the country. 850,000 vehicles almost were handled here last year, in addition to commodities, including millions of tons of coal. So all of that is the economic ramification we have to think about today. And certainly that was on the mind of officials we spoke with here. But the problem is it could take a long time for this to sort itself out. Pete Buttigieg said the path to normalcy will not be easy, it will not be quick, and it will not be inexpensive. And on the point of expenses, on that point, Joe, we did hear from President Biden earlier today pledging that it will be the federal government that is paying this bill for the reconstruction of this bridge. Of course, he will require congressional approval for that in large part, and it's going to be a question of just how long that reconstruction will take, and of course the clearing out of the debris that is currently in the waterway behind me more immediately to get this port back open.
Kaylee, we're really glad that you're there today. Thank you for your reporting. Kaylee Lines, of course, with us. She'll be back a little bit later on this hour when we speak to the former Transportation Secretary, LaHood. We did hear from the president today from the White House. Here's President Biden from earlier.
I spoke with Governor Moore this morning, as well as the mayor of Baltimore, the county executive, both United States senators and the congressman. And my Secretary of Transportation is on the scene. I told them we're going to send all the federal resources they need as we respond to this emergency. And I mean all the federal resources. And we're going to rebuild that port together.
We now add the voice of Bloomberg White House correspondent Josh Wingrove. Josh, thanks for being with us today. President Biden, in that set of remarks, said the federal government will pay for the entire cost of rebuilding that bridge. We'll deal with potential liabilities later. That's the word from the White House. Now there are calls for him to actually go to Baltimore. Will he do that?
Yeah, I think that's up in the air right now, as is the question of whether Congress will ultimately agree to pay for this. This would be a pretty expensive project. We're talking probably years, maybe, to redo this thing, or at least that would be the normal time frame. Biden, at the very least, is going to shift the blame to Congress if they don't fund this thing, and so that's sort of where we're standing on that. In the meantime, I think we're going to see them heavily involved in that question of opening this channel up again once that search and rescue is complete. Biden and his administration put a lot of emphasis on that today, saying that is the priority. And of course, if that search and rescue mission turns into more of a recovery mission, then the question is, how can we get this channel open again, get this ship out of the way itself, get the debris out of the about 50-meter depth path? It's already kind of a squeak-through scenario for some of the bigger ships coming up here, so they need to basically clear it out pretty well to get things going again. And that'll really sort of address the immediate economic sort of chokehold factors here.
Once we get through the search and rescue operation, we want to be sensitive to the fact that they're still searching for 6 people, by the way. These were construction workers who were on that span when it went down. That's right. We've heard as many as 7. There's going to be an economic impact here that we have to acknowledge for a president who's been trying to fight inflation, watching shipping get moved around in the Red Sea. Now we're going to be steering around. Maersk says it will be rerouting around Baltimore. If you're with us on Bloomberg TV, you can see that bridge collapsing right now. Remarkable to watch that. This is a difficult scenario when we consider the impact on trade and pricing.
Yeah, I think, the particular sectors will be more heavily impacted. Baltimore's port, you heard Kayleigh talk about. Autos, pretty significant, right? So if you're, for instance, waiting for a Ford in Minneapolis, you're probably okay. If you're waiting for a Volvo in Pittsburgh, maybe less so. I mean, it's going to be very sort of regional impacts from this. It's also an export terminal. We could see that start to pile up. And so that'll work its way through. But, we had a story today on the terminal about gas prices looking like they're going to go above $4 a gallon again this summer. There've already been these questions of whether the Red Sea attacks, as you mentioned, would sort of flare things up. This is sort of like a sort of more medium-term question. Again, search and rescue effort ongoing. But the political risk here for Joe Biden is that the supply chain snarls flare up again. Voters remember that they're ticked off about how expensive things are and have gotten over the course of the post-pandemic recovery, and that they have that top of mind heading into the fall election. But as of now, in particular with our poll coming out today, Biden does have some momentum, and I think obviously he'll hope that they can build off that.
We're going to get more into that now. Josh Wingrove, thank you so much for being with us. With the view from the White House, President Biden is gaining ground in that poll. This is the new Bloomberg News swing state poll. It's out today. Gaining ground on Donald Trump. Bloomberg senior editor Wendy Benjaminson is here with us now with details as we dig down into these numbers. Wendy, it's great to see you. These, again, are the 7 states that we believe will help to decide this election. And Joe Biden, when you look at Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, suddenly has a more interesting story to tell.
He absolutely does, as long as all the things that Josh just described don't happen and drag him down. But while this poll was in the field, it went out the day after his State of the Union address, which was widely considered to be a political success for him. He is now up 1 point in Wisconsin and tied in Pennsylvania and Michigan. And as Josh has written about, those 3 states are the states that will deliver either one of them, Donald Trump or Joe Biden, to the White House. And so if he can keep up that momentum in those industrial states and pick up the other states where he is narrowing the gap with Donald Trump in every state in our poll except Georgia, then, he actually, if he can keep that momentum going, he's in better shape than he was just a month ago. Now, gas prices hit $4 a gallon. He has another moment where he seems really old. All of that can turn around very quickly. One of the other things that was really interesting in our poll was we measured the depth of support for the candidate himself or for or how much it was a protest vote against the other guy. And for Trump voters, 3 out of 4 of them are voting for Donald Trump. Affirmatively, they are in it to see Donald Trump get the White House, while only a quarter of them are voting against Biden. On the other hand, Biden voters, 45% of the people in swing states who are going to vote for Biden say they are doing it to stop Donald Trump. Not so much we think Joe Biden's a great guy. And so that's something also the White House and the Biden campaign really has to mention.
Remarkable to see folks on both sides, by the way, and this is knowing that Donald Trump is promising to make the 2017 tax cuts permanent. Both sides favor taxing the rich, soak the rich,
really
more than
surprising.
$400,000. How do you vote for Donald Trump if you think billionaires should be taxed at a higher rate?
Yeah, that was
corporations.
really, really surprising to us. So we found out that about 70% of swing state voters across the board favor higher taxes, income taxes on people who make more than $400,000 a year, and a higher tax of some kind on billionaires, whether that's a wealth tax or not. And that included a majority of people who describe themselves as conservative or Republicans.
How about that?
And so if Joe Biden wins and wants to increase taxes, they also favor increasing the corporate tax rate. Then Congress is going to have a hard time saying, no, our people don't want that, because their people do.
This is fascinating. It's really worth the read. Find it on the terminal. And, of course, Bloomberg.com. Our thanks to Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson, who put a lot of time into making that poll accessible for us. Coming up, former U.S. Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood joins. And we'll have Kaylee Lyons with us live from Baltimore. It's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It's going to take some time. The people of Baltimore can count on us, though, to stick with them at every step of the way until the port is reopened and the bridge is rebuilt. You know, we're not leaving until this job gets done.
President Biden earlier today speaking from the White House, saying the federal government will be there for Baltimore and, in fact, will pay for the entire cost of rebuilding the bridge. That is yet to be determined. But back with me now is my partner, Kaylee Lyons, who is in Baltimore. She's been at the scene of that bridge collapse for the balance of the day. We also welcome former U.S. Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood to the conversation. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being with us today. This has been described by Pete Buttigieg as a cathedral of infrastructure. The people who live in Baltimore went to bed last night with their bridge and woke up with it gone. The skyline of Baltimore has changed. The president is springing into action here. At least he says the federal government will take care of this. I wonder your reaction, considering your experience running the transportation department, to see this 1.5 mile long span gone.
Devastating for the region, devastating for the supply chain, devastating for people who have to traverse 37,000 cars a day across that bridge that no longer exists. This is a huge, huge calamity of gigantic proportions for the region, for Baltimore, for the Washington region, for the kind of opportunities that that port has provided to deliver goods all over the world and back into the United States also. But the level of cooperation and coordination and elected officials and appointed officials working together today has been extraordinary. Gold stars to everybody. Everybody's all hands on deck. That's what it will take to rebuild the bridge, to open the channel, to get the supply chain moving again, and also to figure out what happened.
Well, sir, as you talk about all the different authorities that are cooperating on this, pretty much all of them are reluctant to put any kind of timeline on the duration that this may be disrupted. The idea that this port may be closed for some time. Certainly it will take a long time to reconstruct this bridge. They are focused less so on timeline right now, as this is an ongoing search and rescue effort. But what do you anticipate, with your experience and any precedent you've seen, that timeline could look like? How long are we talking? Weeks or months or even years?
Well, if you look at what happened in Minneapolis when that bridge collapsed, completely different circumstances for the collapse. It was rebuilt in a very short period of time. If you look at what happened in Pennsylvania when the bridge collapsed there, again, different circumstances, but the rebuilding took place very quickly because of the commitment of the federal government, DOT, and the state's DOTs. Now, look, at the first and top priority is to continue to search for those who have been lost, those that were on the bridge. And once that is complete, then you'll see a comprehensive plan for reopening the port, reopening the channel and replacing the bridge. And I think it'll be a timetable with all of these people working together that can be sooner rather than later.
Well, sir, I spoke with both senators from Maryland earlier today who were talking about the humans that we have to consider here, not just those who are still unaccounted for and their families, but also those who have jobs at this port, knowing this is a major economic engine for the state of Maryland. And while we are seeing that cargo operators and companies who have cargo that would through this port are starting to divert, both suggested to me they want to make sure that cargo does come back to the port of Baltimore. Would you have any concern that just the flow of transport may be permanently changed by this rather than just temporarily displaced?
Not at all. I think the port is such a significant port, its location, the way that it's managed, the way that they're able to deliver goods in and out of that port. As soon as the channel can be reopened, the port will be reopened. That will mean having to remove the bridge that's collapsed. That's going to take a little time. But as the governor said and the mayor has said, top priority is finding the people that have been lost from the fact that they were on the bridge and trying to locate them. Once that's done, I think you'll see very, very quick activity in getting the port open.
Secretary LaHood, you don't need me to tell you there are thousands of bridges, tens of thousands of bridges around this country that are structurally deficient. That's why we went through the process of getting this bipartisan infrastructure law that the president's been talking about a lot lately. But Wes Moore today, the governor said that this bridge was up to code. So it strikes me this is not an infrastructure story we're talking about. I guess my question is, should bridges be able to withstand an impact from a cargo ship like this? Was this really something that was the fault of the shipping company or the structure of the bridge?
The bridge was built in 1977, long before Baltimore became the significant port that it is today. It is a significant port in our country and in the world, and that bridge was built well before that. I do believe that if you look at structures that are built today, and I have, that the new bridges are built to a much, much higher standard, and that's the way the new bridge will be built along this corridor also.
Sir, you, of course, in addition to being Secretary of Transportation, served as a member of Congress. And knowing that President Biden has said that the federal government will be footing the bill for the reconstruction of this bridge, that is something that would require congressional approval. And we haven't seen Congress be the most functional in the funding department as of late. Would you have any concern about that funding being approved?
Not one bit. This is like a hurricane that hits an area. It's like a tornado that hits an area. What happens is Congress steps up, appropriates the money, and takes care of the people and takes care of the region that's impacted by some kind of a weather calamity, whether it's a fire, whether it's a hurricane or tornado. I have no doubt that Congress will step up under the leadership of the Maryland delegation, under the leadership of the White House, and provide the funding that's needed to rebuild the bridge.
Secretary, we're glad you could share your experience with us today. Former Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood, thank you for the insights. Kaylee Lyons will be back with us a bit later this hour from Baltimore. Coming up, a massive windfall for former President Donald Trump, at least on paper. To follow the SPAC today, we'll have more on that next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Wild stock swings today, the first day of trading for former President Donald Trump's social media firm, Trump Media and Technology Group, making its debut on the public market and potentially adding billions of dollars to Donald Trump's fortune. We know he needs the money. For more, let's bring in Bloomberg's Bailey Lipschultz, who's had eyes on this since before this went public. Bailey, it's great to see you. Look, we spent the balance of this year talking about cash burn and the Trump campaign bleeding money, whether he can post bond in a civil trial in New York. How much does he actually stand to make today? How much did he make on paper?
Yeah, so in total, Joe, right now with the stock valued at about $7.9 billion, he's worth about $4.5 billion on paper. And that number can get closer to $6 billion when using where the stock closed at if it continues to perform well, because as part of the deal, if the stock trades above $17.50 for 20 of 30 days, well, then they give tens of millions of dollars to Trump media insiders, of which Trump owns the majority of that. So the potential billions upon billions of windfall could deliver a big payday, again, on paper for Donald Trump.
How long does he have to lock this in? How long is the lockup?
Currently, as the terms stand, 6 months. That could be edged forward slightly based on some of the terms of the deal, or if the board, which is made up of members of his administration, as well as insiders at the company like CEO Devin Nunes and the digital world CEO Eric Swider, if they move that deadline forward, he could sell sooner than later. But again, kind of to that point where he would make more money on paper if it trades well for 20 or 30 days. It does kind of seem like maybe that'll be a bit of a walk and dance in the next few weeks.
Remarkable headline with your byline on the terminal, Bailey. Trump media now the most expensive U.S. stock to bet against. Does everyone think this is going to zero?
There's a lot of skepticism, Joe. This is a company, again, valued north of $7 billion. In the 9 months through September, it brought in just $3.4 million. So on any real traditional valuation metric, it's probably overvalued relative to peers and fits into the meme stock category. But that's why it gets so risky, because it's difficult to borrow shares as short. And also there's so much inherent risk that when a stock that jumps 58%, just because it's ticker changed and it's associated with the former president, there's risk, again, like the GameStop mania, that it could continue to move higher.
Heard a few references to GameStop today. Bailey, all of this said here, Donald Trump sitting back enjoying this story tonight. You're telling us that he could move up the date to cash some of this in. This is a company that's never made money, correct?
Correct, and it's really a new company. So this deal was struck in October 2021, basically on this idea that something called True Social would be launched in early 2022. They lived up to that. Right. Donald Trump, though, only really has 6.8 million followers on that platform, so not living up to the expectations some had.
Fascinating. We'll keep our eyes on this. I wonder how it opens tomorrow. Bloomberg's Bailey Lipschultz, thank you. As always, coming up, we'll have more on the Baltimore bridge collapse. We're going to talk about how U.S. ports might be impacted, the economic side of this important story next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Every day the harbor's closed, it's millions and millions of dollars lost to the local economy. People are going to be out of work. They're not going to get paychecks. We got to move with great dispatch. But first, let's see whether we can't save some lives.
Democratic Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland earlier today speaking with Bloomberg's Kayleigh Lines at the site of the bridge collapse earlier. Kayleigh is back with us now, having spent much of the day in that very spot. Kayleigh, what can you tell us?
Well, Joe, we are now 16 hours from 1:30 a.m. Eastern time, which is when the Dolly, this vessel, collided with the Key Bridge and it subsequently collapsed. That is just how long this search and rescue effort has been underway. Of course, 2 members of a construction crew that were on the bridge at the time were rescued, one of which was hospitalized. 6 others, though, still remain unaccounted for, and that remains the priority of all of the first responders and authorities involved in this effort, is first and foremost trying to, as we heard the senator say, save lives if they can. Very quickly, though, it will move to a question of recovery and just how long it will take to get transit, and specifically waterborne transit, in and out of this port once again moving. It could be a long haul, as we're talking about autos, commodities, other shipments, imports and exports that move through this port have been disrupted. Companies diverting their cargoes to other ports along the coast, including New York and Norfolk down in Virginia. And of course, commuters and freight distribution that have used this bridge consistently every single day are now having to go the long way around, potentially adding miles to those journeys. So really, it's going to be a matter of sequence. Senator Cardin, in a press conference earlier this afternoon, did say first and foremost, search and rescue, then get the port reopened, and then work on reconstructing the bridge. And on the reconstruction, President Biden today said that he does expect the federal government will be paying for that. It is something that would require congressional approval if he has to make a supplemental request. And I actually asked Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen about that earlier today, just how this funding was going to be broken down. This is what he told me.
There are some funds in what's called the Emergency Relief Fund. This is a fund within the Federal Highway Administration that is there specifically for this kind of emergency. So once the state makes its submission, which I think they're going to do very shortly, some of those funds can begin to be drawn down. Now, for the larger, longer-term costs, yes, we're going to call upon our colleagues in Congress.
And both he and Senator Cardin did express to me confidence that it will indeed pass Congress. But of course, as we just heard Senator Van Hollen say, we're talking long term here. This is probably going to take a while. No one to this point has been willing to put a timeline on either the port reopening or on reconstruction. Everyone still remains at this hour focused on the search and rescue efforts that are ongoing here in the Baltimore area, Joe.
We're lucky to have you there for us, Kaylee. Thank you. My partner, Kaylee Lines, live from Baltimore, where that bridge collapsed in the wee hours. Another major story that's resonating in Washington today and nationally, the Supreme Court signaling that it is likely to support access to the abortion pill Mifepristone. We were, of course, listening to arguments today, and joining us now, Carol Sanger, Columbia Law School professor, author of About Abortion, Terminating Pregnancy in the 21st Century. Carol, it's great to have you with us here. I'm wondering what you heard in those arguments today, and if this conventional wisdom is that the Supreme Court will support Mifepristone, support access. Is that how you heard it?
That is how I heard it. And it's interesting that we're now calling this Supreme Court conventional wisdom, that it might actually favor pro-choice policies, because that's not their reputation. And we know we last saw them in the Dobbs case a year and a half ago, where they removed the Roe right to abortion as a federal constitutional right. So, yes, that's what I heard. And it came as not a surprise, because if you read the briefs, you see things really were tending that way. But there was some, I won't say enthusiasm, but the justices seemed very clear in their views and not skeptical of the approach that they seem to be taking, which is to use a very neutral doctrine to get rid of this case. And that's the doctrine of standing, which is a kind of neutral principle in law that says, if you're going to bring a case against somebody or something, you have to have been injured. You just can't come up and say, I don't like that. You have to show that you suffered an injury. And the doctors who are pro-life and anti-abortion who brought this case can't show that they are in any way harmed by the regulations that they're objecting to.
I want to bring our listeners and viewers inside the arguments for just a moment. A compelling moment for Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch, who questioned whether those against abortion have standing, to your point, to sue earlier today. Here's how he put it.
We have before us a handful of individuals who have asserted a conscience objection. And this case seems like turning what could be a small lawsuit into a nationwide legislative assembly.
What does that tell you, Carol, when you hear Justice Gorsuch articulating that point?
Well, it's from my point of view, it's encouraging, and it has integrity to it, because it would be a real stretch to see how this case could come out otherwise. It would look terrifically political if the judges were suddenly to say, no, actually the FDA had it all wrong. We've got to get rid of that drug Mifepristone. It's no good for women. One of the interesting things here is that Mifepristone is now used by about 2/3 of all women who have abortions, which is amazing because it was like 30% a couple of years ago, and it's simply so effective, and it has so many advantages that it's now the method of choice. And so I like to think about the justices taking seriously what women are telling them. Not that women are determining the decision, but that they're paying attention to what women are doing.
I want to get to the point of this case to the extent that we can to simplify this for our audience. Carol, is this about access to abortion or the mail?
Well, that's a good question. It's about neither and both. It's about first of all, it's about one particular method of abortion, and that's the abortion pill, which is different than a procedure where a pill, all you do is you take a pill or two pills in most cases. Mm-hmm. And so it's about that. And it's also about who gets to say what the rules are about the medications that are used in abortion. And here we know the FDA has to approve all medications. And so 20 years ago, they approved this drug and had tons of evidence and testing and studies showing how safe it was. And then 20 years later, these objections were thrown at them. So the FDA is sticking, and they're saying, we took scientific things into consideration. We're not political on this. We just, does this drug work? Is it safe for people to take it? Yes and yes. And so so it's the kind of drug, the procedures that went into approving it in the first place. And this goes back to what you said, what you pointed out about Gorsuch. He said, mm-hmm. Listen, we can't have a couple of doctors who disagree with legal abortion going out and sort of changing the rule across the nation. And that's what this would do if the court were to find out that the plaintiffs did have standing. And they simply don't. They can't show that they're injured in any way. And one of the reasons is that they are given a conscience exemption. So if you're a doctor and you don't want to perform abortions, in most states you don't have to do it. And so where's your harm? You're not being asked to violate what you truly believe. Yeah. And that would seem to me a very important part of what some of the justices were getting at as well. Justice Coney Barrett, for example.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad we could walk through this together, Carol. Appreciate your insights today. Carol Sanger with us from Columbia Law School. We thank you for the insights today. To Carol's point, if the court did side with the opponents in this case, it would be the first time ever the Supreme Court second-guessed a status like this from the FDA. Coming up, President Biden is gaining ground in 6 of 7 swing states. This comes after 5 months of mostly consistent Trump leads. Our political panel next on our latest swing state poll. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Kaylee Lyons is in the field. President Biden has gained ground against Donald Trump in 6 of 7 key swing states, according to a Bloomberg News and Morning Consult poll out this morning. For more on the shift, we are joined by Lisa Camuso-Miller, former RNC Communications Director, host of the Friday Reporter podcast, alongside Kristen Hahn of Rock Solutions. Great to see you both with us here. Kristen is a Democrat. I'm assuming that you are encouraged. This is the most newsy Bloomberg poll that we have seen since the first one that established Joe Biden's deficit that he now is apparently making up for in some important areas.
I think it's a natural trend because, Trump is the candidate now. There's nobody else, competing with him, even if it was just, Nikki Haley and not doing so well.
Yeah.
But, we're kind of consolidating. The president's getting more aggressive. I think you'll see him be more aggressive against the former president. So, yes, obviously very encouraged, but we still have a long way to go. Some still within the margin of error. So we have a lot of room.
Lisa, our pollsters and our partners at Morning Consult went into the field the day after the State of the Union. We keep hearing there's no bounce after the State of the Union. What's wrong with this guy? It's different this time. Are we actually seeing it now?
Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly there was a very different disposition from the president in that State of the Union address than we have seen over the course of the last several months. So there was a lot of energy. There was a lot of emphasis. I think he really did an excellent job demonstrating that he still had the fight in his gut to go back and come back and forth as it relates to the debate and the presidential. And so, yeah, I do definitely think that that's what we're seeing here.
He's still tied in Pennsylvania. And I realize there's improvement there. He was losing in Pennsylvania before. But this is the state he's been to more than any other. He calls it home. He points to Scranton. He dropped his budget there. If he's tied in Pennsylvania, what does that tell us about the rest of the country?
I mean, I think that we've got a fight on our hands. He's got to get the message out, everything that he's accomplished with, both Republicans and Democrats in Congress, and really speak to the American people about who he is as a person. Because at the end of the day, he's running against somebody who is just, morally corrupt, I think. So, it's an election is as much about what you do and it is as who you are. So.
When you start to break down this poll into some of the issues, taxing the rich really jumped out to me. A fascinating idea because it's shared by both sides here. Now, if you're a Trump supporter, you might have heard about the 2017 tax cuts. You might have heard that he wants to cut the corporate tax rate. But a vast majority of Trump and Biden supporters think we should soak the rich. What am I missing here?
Well, I think that this is clearly a demonstration of how people are feeling as it relates to their own personal budgets, Joe.
Yeah.
They really feel like there should be a greater share of the burden put onto the wealthy, and that's, I think, where we're seeing it over and over again.
And how do you support a billionaire who's spending small donations on his legal fees?
Joe, if I had the answer for that, I might not be sitting with you today.
We've got a gap here. We've got a disconnect here
There is.
that this poll has identified.
Absolutely right. And I think that that's the one that we're probably going to have to dive into and understand better. The truth of it is, though, that everything you see from Republican voters and from Democratic voters is that they want more support as it relates to the economy. And so that's where I think there is a disconnect. If we looked at the finances of both of these candidates that are running for office, I suspect that they both have very, very full pockets and not necessarily the relative pockets of you and me and Kristen. But I think also, too, that the issue itself comes back to just that people care about the economy and they want it to improve.
Well, so how does Joe Biden get to that? Does he run as Amtrak Joe? People have seen the mansion and all this stuff. They saw where the documents were held. Or does he describe himself as blessed and somebody who's been fortunate in his career?
I mean, I think he can do both, but he's been a lifelong public servant. He's been somebody who's really been able to speak to everyday Americans and really kind of relate to them about the struggles that they go through. And I think
he used to tout himself as the least wealthy member of the Senate. Now we're talking about mansions in Delaware, Corvettes, and the rest.
Well, I mean, I still think that he's the candidate that people can relate to. Although President Trump has somehow managed to be a billionaire, perhaps, who is spoken to people who don't think that politicians have spoken to them in the past.
That's right.
And that's where his base is coming from.
And so they make an exception in that case. He's the messenger who's bringing the issues that they want. If he's a rich guy, so be it.
I think he also, too, up until, even now, he really speaks to that audience about how he can also make them successful. There is something in his words that make that base, that MAGA wing of the party, really feel like Donald Trump is going to fight for me. He is going to put those millions and billions that are in his pocket, and they're going to help me get there, too. I don't know why it is or how it is. It's definitely a voodoo magic that I don't necessarily understand. But I do think that still is very much part of why they stand behind him, is because they believe that he, more than a lifelong public servant, as you mentioned, Kristen, is someone that is going to be fighting for them when it comes time for him to return to the White House in their eyes.
One of the states that jumped off the page where we're seeing Joe Biden advance is Wisconsin. You must still have PTSD when you think about 2016 and Wisconsin. Is this campaign learning from Hillary Clinton?
Yes. I mean, I think that there are a lot of lessons to be learned from 2016, and from what I've seen, a lot of those changes are being put into place.
Yeah.
And I think that we were caught off guard. Democrats being we were caught off guard in a lot of ways, and I don't think that you'll see that happen this time.
The blue wall will be in place.
Yes.
Yes.
I think so.
There you have it from Kristen Hahn. Coming up, President Biden says the U.S. should pay to rebuild the Baltimore Bridge entirely. Federal funding. We'll be back with Lisa and Kristen, our political panel, to delve into this. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This is no ordinary bridge. This is one of the cathedrals of American infrastructure. It has been part of the skyline of this region for longer than many of us have been alive. So the path to normalcy will not be easy. It will not be quick. It will not be inexpensive. But we will rebuild together.
Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg earlier today in Baltimore as we reassemble our panel to talk about an important day for the administration, for trade and the economy, and of course the people of that city with 6 souls still unaccounted for. Lisa Camuso-Miller and Kristen Hahn are back with us now. Lisa, this appears to not be an infrastructure story. This appears to have been an accident, if we can call it that. But this is a test for a lot of elected officials, beginning with Joe Biden. We heard from him today. We saw Governor Wes Moore. We saw the senators, members of Congress, of course, Pete Buttigieg, all of them under the microscope now in the way this has been handled. How does a politician face that challenge? You've spent many years communicating and helping elected officials prepare for a moment like this.
I was on the ground in August of 2007 in Minneapolis when they lost the bridge. The president spoke about it August 1st.
Yeah.
Congress unanimously agreed to pay for the reconstruction by the 7th or the 8th of August. So it was within a week. But we're living in a very different political reality right now. And I would hope this is a major artery. This is a major corridor for the Northeast. It is something that it absolutely will affect. Your earlier guest said the same, Joe. This will affect the economy in this region and all across the country for years to come. And so this, to me, is a very easy yes vote for everyone in the Congress to get action and money back to where it belongs. By the way, the city of Baltimore does not need any more knocks on their corner either. They've got enough troubles of themselves.
Look at that. For those of you with us on Bloomberg TV, just watching the image, the video of that bridge collapsing, it happened in the blink of an eye, Kristen. Will this be a controversy on Capitol Hill? The president today, without any warning, called for the federal government to pay for this in its entirety.
I certainly hope not. I mean, I do agree with Lisa. We're kind of in unprecedented times when it comes to the rancor on Capitol Hill. But generally, when there are massive, whether it's a hurricane or an incident like this, that the members come together. It happens in different states, but, the federal government has a responsibility. Like Lisa said, it's a major corridor. So my hope is that they will put their politics aside.
So when they come back from Easter, there's going to be a supplemental budget request. Is that what we should anticipate?
I would anticipate
an emergency request.
Yeah.
In terms of the optics, in terms of the communications here, does Joe Biden need to go to Baltimore?
I would be surprised if he didn't, but also, too, what it looks like when a president moves. It creates way too much. There's so much more that impacts. And so right now, the most important thing is that the search and rescue has got to be happening right now. And so if you're the president and you're all the people that go with him whenever he travels, that just creates more chaos.
Sure.
And so he absolutely should stay where he is right now and let all the people there that are doing the work that needs to be done to get done.
Well, I think we can say with a straight face he could likely be more effective by staying at the White House. That would be a political move. It would be optics. But he was criticized heavily for not showing up in East Palestine, Ohio, even though the administration, like today with Pete Buttigieg, was on the ground immediately.
I think it was a little bit different, but he's sending the Secretary of Transportation as his representative. So he's not absent. I do think this is a different situation. You've got search and rescue, recovery, but George W. Bush was also criticized for not being going to when Katrina hit. So this is something that people criticize presidents for. I don't necessarily think that it's warranted.
Well, they tend to want to head things off as well. I wouldn't be surprised if he showed up there and the coming weeks. To your point, though, this might be a little bit early as this remains a search and rescue operation, one that we're going to keep you posted on here on Bloomberg TV and radio, on the terminal, and at Bloomberg.com. Kaylee Lyons will stay in Baltimore for us to bring us the latest. Our thanks to Lisa Camuso-Miller and Kristen Hahn for a great conversation. Your insights are important to us. Check out the Washington Edition newsletter, as I mentioned, on the terminal and online for the very latest on all of this. We thank you for joining us on Balance of Power. For Kaylee Lyons in Baltimore, I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. This is Bloomberg.